when something becomes so distorted that it goes into its opposite, it goes into its extreme. And extremes always mirror each other in a way where they're behaving the same. And that's because they're at the same realm. So the false light is a battle in the same vibration, whereas the true light is not even a compromise between extremes. The false light is one of the most popular topics within the spirit of this age, but it's often used in contradictory and very confusing ways. So today, I'm going to be explaining exactly what the false light is. The best way that I can describe the false light is whenever there is an extreme in our spirituality. So whenever you see a very strong extreme in a person's own preference and identity and behavior and belief systems, that is rooted inside the false light, because the false light literally feeds off of an extreme. So whenever you see something extremely unbalanced, something that is more extremely favored towards the light, or even extremely favored towards the darkness, that would be what the false light is. In mysticism, the false light is known as when we have externalized our spiritual belief systems to anything that we have been taught, rather than having a true inner knowing, aka a gnosis, a direct experience of exactly what we believe. And so we can see how externalizing our belief systems to authority figures of whatever kind, whether they're in religion or even spirituality, that would be a sense of false light, because it's not coming from our true inner light. So if our inner light hasn't actually had that knowing or that experience for itself, that's what's considered the false light. But I would still consider the false light as being far more than just an inner knowing versus externalizing our spiritual sovereignty. I view that as like one aspect of it. Instead, what I view as the one that will be the most relevant in this age is actually when the false light portrays itself as a martyr. The false light is a spiritual system that feeds off of worship. And not only does it need to have worship being its goal in order for it to be considered false light, but also it feeds off the worship through the vessel of martyrdom. Because what better way could you dress up manipulation than if it looks like a martyr? The false light is like two arms on the same beast, one negative and one positive, one overtly narcissistic and one covertly narcissistic. The false light is when you sell your soul to dark forces, and the false light is also when you don't even know that you're selling your soul because you're stuck in belief systems that feed off of your subservience. So you can see how it doesn't matter whether you consider yourself spiritual or whether you consider yourself religious. The false light operates in all belief systems. Have you ever heard spiritual teachings trying to tell you that if you want to evolve, you are actually in denial and practicing escapism? That's the false light too, trying to gaslight your soul back into matter. Escapism works in many directions, not just in ascension, but also in descension. And most people are escaping their intuition to live in a state of material addiction and hedonism. So escapism is chasing peak states and peak experiences, whether those peak experiences are spiritual or utterly materialistic and human. It's still the same energy of escapism that traces back to the false light. The goal of the false light is to keep you in the lowest realms of matter and the lowest levels of consciousness. It will need a lot of influence to do this, which is why its energy is not just in one sector, but even opposing sectors. You will have to develop nuance to be able to evolve beyond its frequency. You can connect with the true organic light within you by harmonizing your soul with your spirit. Now, this isn't to take away from genuine sacrifice, which is a sign of maturity and a sign of evolution. But there's a difference between dressing up or almost performative martyrdom versus genuine maturity and the sacrifice that comes with growing up. And so when it comes to the false light, it will almost like overly act in a martyrdom position. Why? Because anything that's overcompensating is trying to gain something from it. That's why it's overcompensating. That's even why it's called the false light rather than the true organic light. It's a sense of overcompensation. And so what we'll see is really extreme types of archetypes, like martyrdom is an extreme archetype. Why? To disguise the fact that it's incurring worship. Victimization is disguised in order to be vampiric. So this is why it's not that victimization is wrong or false light. It's that when we almost parade, when we almost overcompensate with these archetypes, and when we overcompensate our own identity as a victim or as a martyr, it's usually done, in the false light at least, for that sense of worship. So I'm talking about everything from the esoteric and the metaphysical realm. Okay, so obviously if a person is stuck in victimhood and they're not trying to get worship, then clearly that's a person who's wounded and that needs support. In this case, when we're talking about the false light in a metaphysical sense or an esoteric sense, now this becomes spiritual figures or a spiritual realm and our spiritual beliefs. And so everything's now having to do with our own spiritual sovereignty and with reality itself. Because the way that our reality is currently set up is so that our life force gets siphoned into these spiritual religious belief systems. So the false light, both in our own psyche and in the spiritual realm, operate off of extremes that are meant to deceive, whether that's deceiving our own selves or deceiving others. And even though that the false light has the strongest theme inside it of worship, that doesn't mean that every single person who's operating from the false light could get worship or is trying to get worship. Sometimes they're just using an extreme to get something else out of it. And so worship is just the largest thing at stake, and it's when we see the false light feeding into the metaphysical realms. Usually when a person is in the false light for their own reasons and their own identity and psychology, it's usually to come off and appear a certain way for an agenda. So for instance, if somebody wants to appear overly meek, overly virtuous, so that then they could get people to think that they are so spiritual or high vibrational. Or if a person wants to appear, once again, the false light's all about deception, smoke and mirrors, therefore appearance rather than the truth, then they will usually try to make the person feel bad for not giving it to them. That's false light, because they're trying to make a person act like a false version of themselves, like a higher or one-dimensional being. And so the false light goes both ways. And this is what's so important to know about it. It could be on the victim end of the spectrum, or it could be on the perpetrator end of the spectrum. Because remember, it's extremes. So it either needs to accuse or make something feel bad for not being one-dimensional or being a certain way, or it needs to go and appear like that thing, that exalted, more spiritual, high vibratory thing. Now, I don't want us to start thinking that everything that is high vibratory is false light. That is not true. You can have truth. You can be rooted inside the organic, true light. I will give a clear example of this in history. Yogananda. Yogananda was not faking it. He was not false light. He was the true organic light, but vibrating so high that to us, it could really appear like, wow, man, that's the ego on a good one. The false light is not about bashing spiritual mastery. It's about being able to have the clarity and discernment to understand the difference between spiritual mastery and deception. And deception will need something from you. It will need your worship. It will need your energy in some way, shape, or form. Whereas the true organic light is not going to act like a victim, not going to need to act like a martyr, not going to need to hurt themselves or put themselves lower, nor put themselves higher. So the false light is all about either needing to be the perpetrator acting like the victim or the victim acting even more like the victim. So there's always this like really strong theme going on of a conflict, a war between two different or seemingly different energies. The best way that I could describe this is through the beautiful ancient phrase from the land of Chem. And that was, the tyrant is the slave, turned inside out. This is exactly what I'm talking about. It is when something becomes so distorted that it goes into its opposite. It goes into its extreme, which is why you'll see that extremes always mirror each other in a weird way. Even if it's not in the directly same way, they'll mirror each other in a way where they're behaving the same. And that's because they're at the same realm. So the false light is a battle in the same vibration, in the same domain, whereas the true light is not even a compromise between extremes. That would reduce the true light. That would reduce the organic light. Instead, the true light is simply rooted in truth, which is why I'm calling it true light. It's simply just the truth, knowing even that maybe not all of the truth is accessible at that time to it. Or maybe this is all the truth that our little hearts can handle at the moment. But it's representing itself in its truth. And so it's not about being meek or weak. It's not about trying to pretend or feign strength or confidence. It can just be a truthful confidence. It could be a rooted confidence. So once again, I'm trying to point out all the different ways that the false light accuses the false light of being false light. So I really want to drive this point home that it operates on both sides of the extreme. Whatever side, as long as it's considering itself on some sort of battlefield, pointing its sword at something else, then it's an extreme. And so because of that, what you'll see is that some people view themselves more as weakness or more inside a powerless position. So then they'll use the false light within themselves to point it at something that they consider stronger or more confident. And so what we'll always have to look at is the discernment. The discernment is our living, breathing guide through everything, because it's not good enough to simply look at something and say, wow, confidence is false light. Confidence is healthy, whereas with fake confidence can be super dangerous. How many times have we seen fake confidence really harm others versus true confidence, which won't feel the need to overcompensate at all? So when we're thinking of the false light, we have to really look at each concept in its individual context, because it's not good enough to just say, oh, weakness all the time is the false light, or oh, confidence all the time is the false light. There's not good enough adjectives to be able to describe the false light as always happening in one case. So what you'll need to understand is what that is trying to get us to do or trying to get us to perceive. That's how we'll be able to discern what the false light is in anything. It's what is this thing, whether it's a person or a belief system or an entity, whatever it is. What is this thing aiming for? What's its goal? What's it trying to get from me? And so what we'll see is that it becomes false light if, one, it's rooted in deception and it wants some sort of hold, some sort of power over your spiritual sovereignty. Whereas with true light doesn't want to take over your spiritual sovereignty. It wants to provide you with enough awareness for your own decisions and your own free will. But it has no goal as to take over, consume a person, own a person, want to take a person's authority. And so that's going to be probably the strongest guiding light for whether you'll tell if something's false light or not. It's if something needs you to worship it or needs your spiritual sovereignty, tries to diminish your spiritual sovereignty. So the main features of the false light is when it requires worship, or it's acting in a spiritually deceptive way. Either that spiritual deception will come off as overly high vibrational, overcompensatingly angelic in order to feed, or it will come off even the opposite of that. It will act like everything high vibrational is fake. Everyone who is high vibrational in spirituality is faking it. You see how those are two extremes? It's because they're both inside the false light and they're both mirroring each other at that level of reality. And the third is when we are trying to put others inside a state of martyrdom, or we are in a state of martyrdom ourselves. So martyrdom in this case is simply when we are overly trying to give of ourselves when it's hurting ourselves. So whether we want other people to do that or whether we're doing that to ourselves, the true light has no problem with appearing however it will appear to other people for the sake of their self-love, as long as they're not harming other people with their self-love, which is actually impossible to do if you truly love yourself. So all of the different ways that we can be inside an extreme are the false light. When we haven't done the true inner work, we will end up deceiving ourselves as well as deceiving others, even if we don't mean to. What this does is leave us as a vibrational match to beings who will also deceive us. So as within, so without, we will also start seeing whether they're spiritual figures or straight up entities or spirit guides in disguise. It doesn't really matter. It will be a deceptive veil. Whatever we're seeing, we're not seeing the truth of it. We're seeing a deceptive form of it. And that's very common in the false light. It's to just oscillate all over the place. So if we ourselves haven't done that inner work, we can project that deception outwards. And so the spiritual figures that we interact with could also be false light. This happens very commonly when a person is at their lowest point, or when a person is raising their frequency to where they will be outside of the false light realm. So once again, even this happens in extremes. If a person's at their lowest point, they are prime for false light figures to come forward and to somehow get them to worship them. But also the same is true for the opposite. Once we're raising our frequency and we're about to pass the realm of the false light and raise our frequency above that, we're also going to have spiritual figures or any form of people come and try to make us feel like we're doing something very bad, very wrong, very evil. And that's because the false light is trying to gaslight you into stopping raising your frequency. Now, when you raise your frequency past the false light, it's not like all of a sudden you become an egomaniac who just worships yourself. That's what the false light wants you to believe. That is the false light's smear campaign off of you leaving it, because it's such a attractive lever. It has to make you feel really evil for being healthy. But when you raise your frequency past the false light, it does not mean that you start worshiping yourself or that you're into evil. Instead, you're just past the frequency of everything that needs to be in any form of either worship or conflict. Unity consciousness is past the false light. Unity consciousness is true light. You could see that because it's truly raising your vibration. Once again, when I use the example of Yogananda, you will be of a higher spiritual mastery. There is such a thing. It's just not going to be found when you are in so much different conflicts and extremes and battles. That's all reflecting that the level of the playing field that we're in is the false light. So we're very primed to false light entities appearing to us as spiritual masters or spirit guides. When we haven't done the inner work and we have unresolved trauma, and then we go through a dark night of the soul. So the dark night of the soul is when we're open to questioning ourselves. We're very vulnerable. We're super vulnerable when we're definitely going through a dark night of the soul, because that's the ego coming undone. Well, when we're vulnerable in that state, we can have false light entities appear to us. And if we haven't done the inner work yet with our own shadow, and if we have unresolved trauma, then we can look at these false light figures and then start worshiping them. We will think that what we're doing is wrong instead of allowing that spiritual transformation that was taking place to happen. That stage of having your whole body, mind, spirit come undone so that it can come and form again into a stronger, higher unified form. That process is called metanoia. It is a melting down of your psyche. When you are melting down and a false light entity comes in there, then we will accidentally confuse our own growth as being wrong. And so this is a very vulnerable state. And this is what I'm trying to make the point as. The false light feeds off of us when we're in vulnerable states. So the true light will help guide you through vulnerable states and stages. Okay, so it's not like the true light just sits there. But I want you to see the difference between the true light, whatever that is, whether it's a spiritual master or spirit guides or whatever you consider. The true light will guide you through that process, will help you, almost like an energetic medicine through that process, if that's what a person is seeking. The false light is going to prey off of that vulnerable process because you're in a state of vulnerability. So when we're going through an ego death or a dark night of the soul or metanoia, we're confused because we're expanding. That confusion is what's being exploited by the false light. The largest misconception after learning about the false light is that we think we have to hoard all our appreciation, admiration, and reverence. This is the trap I see many people fall into. It is a shame when we stop admiring others or revering the spiritual. And it also leads to narcissism. I can name philosophers, poets, and ascended masters to fill both hands that I admire or revere. So that is not my message at all. I'm simply saying that the false light wants to use souls as energetic supply by lowering their consciousness into subservience. In summary, being high vibrational is not false light. It's all of the things that are pretending to be high vibrational that are false light. I hope this has exposed the false light. Make sure to subscribe to my channel for higher dimensional guidance through spiritual awakening. See you next time.